again, and welcome to EL 121, the short story and essay writing, and this is session 4 of the series of sessions on the short story. This session corresponds to Unit 4 in your book, which is Focus on Character. Okay, this is actually what we're doing today. We're going to be addressing the all-important short story element of character. Before we get started, and like we always do, let's first of all share how we're going to do that. We're going to divide the session into two parts, two main parts. The first part is going to lay the theoretical background of this unit, talking about the characters, what we mean by characters, the different types. We're going to explore also motivation, motivations of characters, and we're going to end up this section talking about characterizations and how characters get revealed in a short story. Okay. When we're done with this part, we're going to move to the second part of the course, which is the application part, where we're going to have a short story feature. The short story that we have chosen for you this time around is Langston Hughes's Thank You Ma'am. Okay, an interesting short story, I promise you, and we're going to focus more on the short story element of character in it. Okay, so if you have the book with you, this is page 87, and when you go to all the way to page 87, you're going to have the mirror of the unit. So again, it's unit 4, like I told you, and the title of this unit is Focus on Character, and focus we will on character this time around. Okay, let me read the outline as given in page 87, and then after that we are going to start this part 1 of session 4 on the short story element of character. So like I told you, unit 4, focus on character, and then you have the number of sections that I told you about. You have the section 1 is the background information part, where a definition or an attempt at a definition of characters is given, and then is followed by different kinds of characters. Characters can be of different kinds, like, as we're going to see, whether they are main or minor, flat or round, dynamic or static. We're going to talk about that in details. And then how are characters revealed. Okay, this is one of the things that we're going to address together, how characters get revealed. After we're done with that, like I told you, we're going to move to the second part of this session, which is the reading section, which I mean, of course, this corresponds to the reading or the read section in the mirror of the unit. So read Thank You Ma'am by Langston Hughes. So Langston Hughes' Thank You Ma'am will be discussed with a very special reference and focus on the short story element of character. There is going to be some kind of introduction to Thank You Ma'am, where we're going to talk about Langston Hughes himself. I mean, we're going to talk about his output and his artistic of what he has covered, and his contribution and his significance and stuff like that. And then after that, this is going to be followed, of course, with discussions spawning out of the plot narration. I'll give you some information and some clues as what happened in the short story, and out of this we're going to come up with lots of ideas, and then we're going to follow that with the rounding up section, where the new terms that we have been exposed to are introduced again as a reminder, and then you have the section called What Have I Learned in This Unit, which is like a list of, it's like a checklist against which you can assess your experience, your learning experience in the unit, and see whether you have benefited or not, whether you have missed any of the points presented or not. And then finally, and typical of every and each unit, you have previewing for the next unit. Okay, again, the objectives of the unit as given again on page 87. Define character in a short story. This is number one. Describe the different kinds of character. Explore the motivation of characters in one short story. And the short story that we have, like I told you, Thank You Ma'am by Langston Hughes. And we're going to end this section by examining how characters are revealed in short stories. Okay. Again, the required reading for this unit and for this session is Langston Hughes' Thank You Ma'am. Okay, let's go to the unit proper, and this marks the beginning of our activities in part A, or part 1 of the session, which is the laying the theoretical foundation of the unit. We're going to let's now talk about characters, what characters mean, and their different types and stuff like that. So what's a character? Okay, what's a character in a short story or in a piece of fiction? Characters are like individuals or persons that populate the short story. So if you have a short story, or a novel, you have to have characters because they further the action of the short story or the novel. And obviously, short stories are about characters. Characters in places. Okay, so characters acting and reacting to the places that they are set in. Okay, so when we say characters and when we say individuals and persons, does it mean that short stories or characters are only human beings? No, obviously the answer is no. You can have animals as characters in some of the short stories, especially if you're talking about children's literature. And if you talk about fables, sometimes in order to drive certain messages home, especially religious ones, you can have animals speaking and having and taking up human attributes. And you also have, you can have objects, and these objects can stand, objects and qualities, and they can assume roles and functions in a short story. They can play the roles of characters, and this is especially in certain novels and short stories. Ghassan Kanafani can come readily to mind because he is in some of his works you have objects and they assume the role of characters. They are characters. Okay, so obviously a short story has characters, and the characters, like I said, can be human beings, and they can also be animals or even objects and abstract ideas and qualities. Okay, so again the question is, can we have a short story without characters? And like I told you, the answer would be no. There is no way you can have a story, a short story about a house that is uninhabited. You don't have people inside. Okay, so only when you have people reacting to what happens in the house, their relationship to the house and the surroundings, and their feelings of like love and attachment to the place, belonging to it or not, that we start having substance to talk about. Otherwise, the short story would be empty, and setting is important. If you have a place, it's very important. If you have a house, if you have a factory, if you have a company, but it has to, these places have to be populated by human beings, because only when human beings are there. We start to have substance, and we start to explore relationships among the different characters in themselves, and also we can always set the characters against their background, against I mean the revelations, I mean ideas about the place that they belong to. Okay, so again, setting can be very important. Plot can be very important too, but characters are, of all the other short story elements, characters stand out as the most important. Unless you have them, obviously there is no chance you can call your piece of writing a short story. Okay. Let's now move to characters in terms of kinds or types. Now that we have established the fact that characters are very important in a short story, so you have variations among characters, you have differences. Some characters are very important and they play very major role in developing the events in short stories, and some characters are only there because I mean the main characters are set against them. It is only when you use them as tools, as foils, that you can know more about the main and the major characters. So characters, like I told you, we have three categories of characters. You have main and minor characters. By the way, if you look at the phrase, if you think deeply about the phrase, you can come up with a definition of it. When I say main characters, main character, of course, main in terms of importance, and like we're going to see. Okay, so you have main and minor characters. You have main and minor. You have dynamic and static, and you also have round and flat characters. Well, like I told you, we're going to talk about every and each one of them. So again, let's talk about the idea of main and minor. So when I say main character, I mean that this character is very important. Important in the sense that its fortune or misfortune affects the entire short story. Okay, you cannot take this character, the main character of the short story, without like wreaking havoc with the fabric of the short story. It just collapses. Okay, so main characters are important, and the importance that they are given is not based on whether they are rich or poor, on whether they are strong or weak, or on whether they are ordinary or heroic. No, it's based on the fact that they further the action of the short story, and through them and through the revelations, we can know more about the short story, and the short story can make full sense with them around. Okay, so main characters. This is main characters, and the opposite would be, of course, minor characters. And by definition, minor characters are characters who are, if you set them against main characters, of course they are going to be less important. And if they are less important, it means that you can take them off the short story, and the short story remains intact, and it can make sense. Okay, they do help in moving the action forward, but you cannot depend on them, I mean, exclusively, like you do with main characters, for furthering the action of the short story. Okay, writers use them as tools or files, or files through which we can see the main characters. You can always see the main character if you set him or her in comparison with the minor character. Okay, minor characters, unlike main characters, they don't have capacity. They don't have a capacity for change. They don't change. They remain as is all through. Okay, they don't develop. They don't develop mentally, physically, or emotionally. Okay. Let's move to another classification of characters. You have dynamic versus static characters, and I want you to look very closely and listen very closely to the phrase dynamic character and static character. I mean, what I'm trying to say that you can figure out what they mean simply by thinking of and about them. So dynamic characters means that they have a sense of dynamism to them. Dynamism means that they are colorful, they have a capacity for change, they develop, they get changed by experience. Okay, so there is you cannot help but, I mean, there is a great deal of substance of and about them. You can have a lot. I mean, coming out of the reading experience of a short story, you can talk a lot about a dynamic character because of how colorful the character can be. Okay, so how can I identify dynamic characters? Dynamic characters are whom in a short story? Dynamic characters are those who discover something they had not known before. This is one of the criteria. In order to judge whether a character is like dynamic or static, see whether there was like something that he hadn't known, and then it got revealed to him. This is one of the things. Come to realize a certain truth. Okay, a dynamic character can come to a realization of a certain truth. A dynamic character can struggle with some kind of inner conflict. Dynamic character can experience feelings of joy, sadness, sympathy, or indifference. Dynamic characters react to the world around them. And finally, dynamic characters can be changed by experience. Okay. If you think of the repertoire of characters that we have taken so far in the different short stories, the previous ones, you can apply these things in order in your classification if you want to see whether the characters that you have dealt with are dynamic or static. So, for example, let's take them one at a time. If you think, for example, of the criteria or this piece, you see one of the criteria of judging whether a character is dynamic or not, see whether there was a secret or he has discovered something that he was unaware of. For example, if you apply this to the short stories that we have taken, value point, so Jimmy after 20 years comes readily to mind. Remember, at one point there was this commitment and pledge between him and Bob, his friend, that they are going to meet after 20 years, and they came on the spot where they are supposed to meet after 20 years, only for Jem to discover that his friend Bob is a criminal and wanted by the Chicago police force, and this is, of course, is going to trigger. Actually, the action is going to take on a different turn. Okay, so Jimmy Jimmy discovers that, and this is going to dictate how he is going to behave. And if this tells you something, it tells you that Jimmy is a major character. Is sorry, a dynamic character. Again, I mean, dynamic characters can come to realize a certain truth. Okay, if you apply this to the short stories, you, for example, can think of to build a fire. Think of the character of this nameless individual that is the main character. Think of him. Think of the truth that he came to realize. The truth was simply that he cannot go it alone. He should have listened to the advice of the old timer when he told him that it's too cold for him to go on his own in order to catch up with his friends and that freezingly cold weather. But of course he didn't listen. Okay, so it's towards the end of the short story, when it was unfortunately much too late, he comes to this realization, and it is true that he changed, but he was not given the time to like act on it. He is going to die tragically out of, for example, out of cold, he was frozen to death. Okay, in spite of the fact that he died, but he died a totally changed person based on the fact that he came to realize that he was mistaken. This is the truth that has been hidden from him all through, and it's only towards the end that he discovers it, and he, like I told you, unfortunately he dies before acting on it or being getting inspired by it. Again, dynamic characters struggle with some kind of inner conflict. So lots of the characters that we have seen so far have this struggle with the inner characters. Okay, especially if you think, for example, Jimmy again. If you think of Jimmy, we said that on a number of counts, Jimmy is a dynamic character. Okay, because for one, he comes to he discovers something that he hadn't known before about Bob, and also because he has this internal and hidden struggle within his mind and soul, whether to turn his best friend over to the police or to act as if he doesn't know about the fact that his friend is a criminal. This is the internal struggle that defines the character of Jimmy, and of course he opts for handing his friend over to the police. This makes of him again a dynamic character. Dynamic characters experience feelings of joy, sadness, sympathy, or indifference. Apply this to the different short stories that we have. You're going to come up with the, for example, think of the character of okay, I'm sorry, I need to go also to give you another example of another character when it comes to the struggle within the inner, the struggle with some kind of inner conflict. We said we spoke about Jimmy. Okay, this is the struggle, and also if you think also of the of the character of the narrator in from A Letter from Gaza. Okay, obviously he had this inner conflict within his mind and soul. The conflict is basically, the inner one is basically of whether to stay in Gaza or to move to California, where things are better over there. He would be better off. So he has this struggle whether to leave his family behind and leave Gaza wholesale behind and move all the way to California or not. So this internal conflict is what defines the character of the narrator, and of course you know the story and you know what happened, and the very brave decision that he has taken of not pursuing his dreams in California and deciding to stay in Gaza no matter how and what. Okay. And then experiencing dynamic characters experience feelings of joy, sadness, sympathy, or indifference. Okay, so all of the characters that we have seen, I mean, exhibit all these kinds of feelings. Okay, so feelings of joy and sadness. Okay, apply this to again to the character of the narrator in after 20 years, and see how he moves between happiness and sadness. He starts off very sad and very miserable and disappointed with Gaza, its people, and he is even, I mean, the description of Gaza in this part of the short story is very dark and very black. Okay, but over time, when he meets his niece Nadia, and he gets to know about her sacrifice, I mean, his sadness and indifference and all these kinds of things turn into happiness and accommodation. The fact that he starts to accommodate himself to the circumstances around him, and hence the big decision of giving up all his dreams and staying behind in Gaza. Okay. If you think of the feeling of indifference, for example, you have the character of the I mean, the main character in To Build a Fire. I mean, he was exhibiting feelings of indifference. He's shutting his ears against the good advice of everybody, and he's acting very indifferently to people around them. If they tell him, no, you shouldn't go, he goes. This is indifference, and of course he's going to pay very dearly for it. Another thing about dynamic characters is that they react to the world around them. Applies. I mean, you can never have a character not reacting to the surroundings around him, and this applies again to A Letter from Gaza and the character of the narrator, and how he reacts to I mean, his life, whether in Kuwait when he was a teacher over there and he felt that he was like an oyster, and he lives in isolation, and then he went to Gaza, and this feeling gets augmented, and he thinks of Gaza as a big prison that there is no way he can like escape and get away from, because of the ties that he had, and he finds very ambiguous ties to his family, to his house, to Gaza as a whole. Okay, and then the final thing about dynamic characters is that they can be changed by experience, and we have plenty of examples when it comes to the change through experience. Okay, think of the character of the man in To Build a Fire, and how different he became towards the end of the short story. Think of the character of the narrator again in A Letter from Gaza, and how changed and different he became after the meeting with his niece in hospital. Okay, so let's move. So if you have dynamic characters, the complete opposite would be static characters. Okay, so static characters, as the phrase suggests, static means they are immobile. They don't change. They don't change in the sense that they remain the same all through. Okay, so you don't expect much from them. Okay, they are they are cast in a certain mold, and they remain as is all through. So unlike dynamic characters, static characters do not change during the course of the story. They are usually minor or secondary in a literary work. Okay. So static characters are all over the place. Okay, static characters can be I mean, but obviously Bob didn't have. We haven't seen that change in his character within the scope of the short story. I'm not talking about change in terms of appearance, in terms of the how many years he spent in the West and stuff like that. Talking within the scope of the short story, he doesn't have the realizations that the other characters have. He doesn't get changed. Okay, so he lacks all the criteria that can qualify him for a dynamic character status, as it were. Okay, think also of who else. Think of the character of the mother in Jack and the Beanstalk, and how static she is. She doesn't change. She projects the image of the nagging mother, and she remains nagging and abusive all through. Okay. Let's again think of characters in terms of whether they are round or flat characters. Okay, so round. Okay, I want you to set the two adjectives against each other. So you have round, okay, and flat. Okay, so when I say round, you have different facets, you have different dimensions. Okay, so when you look at or on a ball, so you can look at it from different perspectives, right? You can look from above, from beneath, from the east, from the west. Okay, so different directions. Okay, different dimensions. But when you look at something flat, I mean, it doesn't have all the dimensions that we're talking about in round characters. Okay, it doesn't have so many facets. Okay, and if you apply the analogy of roundedness and flatness to the characters, so you have characters who are round in the sense that they are realistic in the sense that they exhibit virtues and vices within their character. They are also colorful. I mean, they can be mad at times. They can be happy at times. Okay, they are simply unpredictable. Okay, so round characters you cannot predict what they can do, and this is the beauty of a round character. It's so very realistic. You cannot expect what he or she will do next, and this is something interesting. So again, we're talking about the multi-dimensionality aspect of round characters, different facets, multifaceted. Okay, and we're also talking about development, whether this development is emotional, physical, psychological, mental. Okay, so a round character has this capacity for change. Okay. Let's now talk about flat characters. Like we said, flat characters are one-dimensional character. One-dimensional, it means that they don't have this capacity, obviously, for change. They don't change. They remain the same all through. Okay. If you need examples of round characters, okay. So the characters that we spoke about in terms of dynamism are also the characters who are round. think of the narrator in A Letter from Gaza, and see how realistic this. Remember, realism is one of the criteria that we use to judge a character as round. He's very realistic in the sense that he exhibits all these, different and mixed emotions. Sometimes he's disappointed, sometimes he's happy. Okay, of course he has reasons for being happy and for being sad. Okay, so you have different ways of looking at him. Okay. Round characters, again, if you think of Jimmy is a round character, okay, because he develops. Obviously, the span of 20 years has changed him a lot. He develops beyond recognition, even for his friend. Mentally. When his friend, I'm sure his friend Bob was shocked to get to know, for example, that Jimmy is no more than the one who has told about him, that has reported him to the police force. Okay, so he is a round character in the sense that he developed into a mature person who knows that law and order should take precedence over loyalty to a friend and love for a friend. Let's move to flat characters. So again, flat characters, one-dimensional. They don't change. They're not very realistic. They don't assume big roles in a short story. Okay, they are stereotypical or fixed. Stereotypical, it means that they introduce stereotypes. The nagging wife, the oppressive, sometimes the oppressive and abusive parent, the mad scientist. These are all stereotypical examples of flat characters. We sometimes call them stock characters. Stock in the sense that they're, you always get to know what they are up to, what they can reveal and give as characters. Okay. So again, flat characters are stereotypical or fixed. They are also known as stock characters, and the basic idea to or behind them is the fact that they don't change mentally, physically, or emotionally like their round counterparts do. We have, by the way, examples. Think of the character of the mother in Jack and the Beanstalk, and how oppressive and coercive she was. She doesn't change. Obviously, she's not satisfied. Her son does everything in his power to make her happy, but obviously she is not so happy. Okay, but she projects the image of the abusive and oppressive mother. She doesn't change one bit. The same applies to the ogre in the short story. He projects the image of the evil creature, and so it's always there. You have this character, it's a stock character that writers normally invoke if they are talking about good and evil and stuff. Let's move to another aspect of characters. which is the idea of um, motivation. Motivation is very important in a short story. Unless you know about the motives of characters, unless the characters have motives and motivation, they are not very convincing and believable. So motivations are the reason. I mean, these are the reasons why characters act and behave in certain ways. Okay, otherwise they are not going to be plausible and realistic. You wouldn't identify with them because they don't represent you. They are not human beings. Okay, we act out of motivation. We as human beings, uh, when I try to be better, to work very hard, it's out of the pure motivation of having, for example, ambition to be better and stuff. Like, if somebody decides to kill somebody else, he has to have motivation. Maybe he is a thief and he is greedy and wants money, he wants to be rich. Okay, so this is also motivation. What other motivation? I mean, jealousy can be motivation. Okay, sympathy and love and loyalty can also be good motivation for further action. Think of the relationship between, for example, Jamie and Bob, and the motivation behind. So remember, they met after 20 years, and the motivation is obviously, or the reasons for that was the fact that they are, as friends, they are very loyal to each other, they love each other so very much. What a beautiful motivation it is, obviously. Think of who else? Think of the motivations behind the decision of the narrator in A Letter from Gaza to stay behind in Gaza. Obviously, motivations of belonging to a certain land, this idea of patriotism can be a good enough motivation for the narrator, and he decides to stay behind. Okay. Also think of Nadia and her act of sacrifice, her brave act of sacrifice. Why did she, like, in an act of pure selflessness, she covered, when Gaza was bombarded and there was this shell, and she covered her different brothers and sisters in order to protect them from the shell. The motivation behind something like that is that she loves her family so very much, that she is patriotic, she is loving, and she is innocent, and she is everything nice and beautiful. Okay. So again, motivation is all in a short story. If you don't have motivations, the characters remain unbelievable, unrealistic, not convincing, very fragile. You don't. They don't have their. There is no justification for them to be there, and then there is. They wouldn't be very convincing, like I'm saying. Okay, this is motivation, and like I said, it's very important. And then we move to the last part of this part, the theoretical part of the session, which is how characters are revealed. This is what we refer to as characterization. Characterization means looking at the method through which the writer presents or introduces his characters. Okay. Characterization is divided into direct, otherwise known as explicit characterization, or indirect, otherwise known as implicit characterization. So explicit characterization is by definition um, meant to present and introduce characters in an indirect way through the narrator. The narrator can tell us directly about the characters. Other characters can tell us about the character also very directly. The character himself can talk about him or herself very directly to us. This is direct characterization, which is not very, this is very artificial to have somebody to have lots of authorial voice, to have the like the author telling you in a very straightforward about the character. This is not, of course, very realistic, or not very engaging and convincing. That's why we have implicit characterization. Implicit characterization means that you figure out the kind of character that you're dealing with based on his thoughts, his ideas, his actions and reactions. Okay, the way he dresses, the way he speaks, his speech, okay, his thoughts and things like that. Okay, so you try to piece these clues together and come up with a conclusion and a judgment of the character. Okay, so this is what we call implicit or indirect characterization. So all in all, characters are presented in the following ways. Characters, of course, whether they are dynamic or static, whether they are flat or round, whether they are main or minor, characters can be revealed in the following ways. They can be revealed through a description of the character's physical appearance, how he or she looks or is dressed. Characters can be revealed through direct statement. The writer tells you right away, in a very straightforward, what kind of character to expect. Characters can be revealed through the character's actions, what the character does. Characters can be revealed through dialogue by examining the character's words and responses. Characters can be revealed through what other characters say or think about him or her. Characters can be revealed through the character's name. And characters can be revealed through the character's thoughts, what they think of. Okay? If you apply that to the short stories that we have taken, you can know a great deal about the characters we have. Let me give you, for example, an example of how of characterization or how characters are revealed through direct statement. Through direct statement, this applies very much to, for example, the character of the nameless man in To Build a Fire. Okay, so the writer tells us straight that the character is not very, I don't remember the exact words that the writer used, but he at one point told us that that this guy is crazy, that this guy is crazy and inexperienced. Okay, and this is also this is direct, and also and this, if it is direct, if it is this direct, it means that this is, of course, explicit characterization. We also, if you still remember, we also got to know about the character of this man, the nameless man, through the eyes of his dog. The fact that his dog was not approving of what he used to do. Okay, this is also, if we assume that the dog is a character, so you get to know about a character through the opinions of others, and the dog here can tell us a great deal about his. He was astonished, actually, the dog was astonished at what he has seen of his owner. Remember, he was the dog behaves very instinctively, and in this short story, Jack London is obviously trying to restore people's confidence in instinctive judgments. Okay, when you trust your instincts, and I think he succeeded in doing just that. Again, characters can be revealed through the character's name or the lack thereof, right? If you have a name, it can have significance. So what happens if you don't have a name? This is also very significant, and it can tell you a great deal about the character. You can only think, if you talk about that, if you can only think of the character of the nameless man in Jack London's To Build a Fire, okay, and the fact that he doesn't have a man is very significant, and it tells us that whatever happened to the guy, the situation he found himself in, applies to all humanity. Every and each one of us can be that man, especially if you think of the idea that man is. We have this arrogance to our characters. We are proud. If you still remember, pride is one of the 7 deadly sins in the Bible. For example, it is one of the 7 deadly sins, pride, and human beings are proud, even at the expense of their own lives. So you can think of the lots of the tragedies that we have, Shakespeare and otherwise, where the reason why a character would fail towards the end of the play would be because of his pride, the fact that he wouldn't listen, like the character of Jack London's To Build a Fire. He wouldn't listen to the advice of good people. Through the character's thoughts, it's the same thing. Okay, think of Jimmy. Think of the narrator in A Letter from Gaza. Think of the nameless narrator in To Build a Fire. Okay. On this note, we come to the end of the first part of session 4 on the short story element of character. Thank you and see you soon. Bye.